Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, very special guest, very pleased to present you in a way, Shane Buettner, the founder of Intervention Records. He is so kind to tell us a bit about the business, probably give us some insights, and let's get right into it. Shane, tell us, how was it when you started with your beautiful label?
Michael, thank you very much for having me.
Mm.
This starting a record label, which people ask me why I did it, the first answer, probably the best, was a really good friend of mine, Robert Baird. He used to be the music editor at a US-based magazine called Stereophile. Mental illness was his diagnosis as far as why I started it. Actually, it's interesting because, in your channel, you've covered so many different audiophile labels, including some that are not around. And
Mhm.
one of the labels that isn't around anymore was a real inspiration for me. It was a label called Classic Records. And the thing that I loved about Classic Records was that they did contemporary music. The
Mhm.
canon from the 50s to the 70s has just been plowed, replowed, plowed again, dug back up. Overdone. But from the late 70s forward, no, not nearly as much. And Classic used to do a lot of really interesting records. And when they went away, I thought they kind of left a hole in the market. And at the time, two of my very close friends are Joe Harley and Ron Rombach, who at the time were running a label called Music Matters Jazz, doing, definitive Blue Note reissues.
Yeah.
Since then, Joe Harley's gone on to do the Tone Poet series. Very close friends of mine. And the short is that they, were kind enough to take me to mastering sessions and kind of tell me, how some of this is done behind the scenes. And the ideas that I had in mind for a label are kind of twofold. Like, what if somebody took the approach that Music Matters takes to jazz records, right? And took that attention to detail and, creating the absolute go-to sonic archive of every album. And they did it for the rock and pop records that I love from the late 70s through the 90s. Yeah, exactly. Joan
For
Armatrading.
example, my best audiophile non-jazz related album of 2020, your Joan Armatrading edition, which is fantastic. And that's I totally agree, of course, that this makes intervention records so special. You really go into a different direction than those mostly jazz related, blues related audiophile labels in general do. And that's really special, and totally agree when you started this history with classic records and the climax with the Led Zeppelin editions, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Well, I,
I'm glad
I
you,
think you
I'm
also
glad you
have.
brought it.
Sorry, Shane. I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think you also have the opportunity to cast a wider net for a much larger audience, right? Because I think if you look at the market today, to your point, all the stuff that's been mined from the 50s and 60s was mostly jazz and classical music. And, when you get into rock and pop, your audience just suddenly balloons up, right? So, you've got a much bigger chance of success in selling a lot more records, obviously, and creating a much wider accepted brand than if you just focus on jazz and classical music, which sadly, in today's day and age, has just kind of dwindled away.
Well, and let's put it this way too. I don't think that this world needed another another label doing jazz and classical. I thought that there was, Joan Armatrading is a great example of an artist that I thought, deserved that kind of treatment, deserved an old style or tip-on jacket. You could see there, one of the things I absolutely love to do, like I said, I really do, in terms of the album art and, the sound, going back to the best sounding analog tapes possible whenever the source is analog. and really doing the best ever version in every way is really important to me. And that one is a perfect example. Okay, I mean, one of the things I love to do is original albums used to have inner sleeves where they'd print the lyrics and have other information and stuff. I absolutely love turning those into single gatefolds, like the Joan Armatrading. You know, one of the reasons, exactly. I mean, I think that is a truly just deluxe, beautiful treatment that a rock record is typically not going to get in the reissue market. Let's say there's some of the other reissue labels that are otherwise doing a fine job. I don't think they always pay that much attention to the album art, which to me, you know, the very first, you can see this on my website, but the very first album I ever bought, that is actually, okay, there are a few different album covers that I love. That one is arguably my very favorite, okay? And the story I loved, yeah, so John Patrick Byrne, a really interesting guy. That's the artist who did the Steelers Wheel records and did the interesting album art for Jerry Rafferty's solo stuff. That inner sleeve, you only saw half the cow on either side of the inner sleeve. So putting it in a gatefold and assembling it is the only way people have ever seen the whole cow.
Finally,
now,
we get the whole cow.
Yeah, I don't know why there's a cow on the album cover or like what that means about, you know, Ferguson Park is the area in Scotland where Jerry Rafferty, Joe Egan, you know, grew up. And, you know, beyond that, I have no idea whether it's a rural farming community or what, but that's a perfect example of the kind of things that you can do. And the other aspect of that too is one of the reasons the audiophile market is so interesting because when you know that you're making a $35 record and you're doing all these things, you know, versus when vinyl was the ubiquitous format, right? The boutique approach to doing the jacket, to pressing the records, right? I mean, they used to just press the records until the goddamn stampers fell apart, right? Oh, we need a new stamper because that one broke. So, you know, if you, that whole thing about finding an early and all that, that could be very real because sometimes those later pressings were literally right before it was about to fall apart. You know, so we're changing the stampers every 500 records. So every single one, you know, intervention record is a pristine experience. My represses are all pristine. Like there's no, oh, you know, people email me and they're like, oh, it's a repress, but how could I still get a first press? I'm like, they're all first presses. We only run 500. We run a new stamper. They're all great. And back in the day, you didn't get that, and that's even excluding, you know, when they really started to rig the game and using old vinyl labels and all dirt gunk, melting those down and then making records out of those. And then, you know, you could never do the kind of job on the jackets in the mass market that we can do in the specialty market. You know, I mean, and the thing that I love is I can look and see what the intentions originally were to do an interesting jacket. Like the Ferguson Park is kind of one example. One of my other favorites is Joe Jackson's Look Sharp. The original, the very first UK pressings. What Joe really wanted is the very original UK pressing. The entire black and white cover was like a matte texture, like kind of a rough texture. And then those bitchin' shoes, which have their own, you know, they get the shoes by Denson. It got its own credit on the back cover of the record. Awesome. Those were supposed to be bright white. So we were able to do like a spot varnish on the white shoes and then really rough out and deboss the cover. And then I did it as a brown in. So it really looks like a 70s era, but I mean, it was extraordinarily costly, and there's just no way you could have done that for them. In fact, the you know, they only did a very limited run of that original UK that had the roughed out jacket. So I love the fact that we can, you know, not recreate these things and frankly make them better than they were before.
Yeah.
And to your point, Shane, it's consistent whether you're record number 500 or 1,000 or however many you end up pressing, you still get the same experience, the same jacket, which unlike, you know, the original, as you said, was only limited to the first couple of 100 pressings or, you know, records that were sold. So that's a great point.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And also that you give your customers really, when I listen to an intervention records and I have it in my hand and the record is on the turntable, you really feel that you go the whole 9 yards.
Yes.
There is nothing which is looked over or left or is like, come on, it's too much work. No, you really go to the whole 9 yards. And I think that when we consider the catalog you are going into, Joe Jackson, Joan Armatrading, Erasure, and on and on and on, I think that's quite different in many ways. In many ways, if you look at the jazz remaster, it's so different because the later it gets, the more diverse I think the whole market, the whole music, the whole production process has gone, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, and I, like I said, I really felt that there was, you know, and a lot of it is as simple as being the music that I grew up on, you know, and grew up with and was interested in. I mean, and that really is the way the process works. I always say that running a label is a long process of turning no into yes, and asking. But, you know, a lot of the stuff that you see in my catalog is stuff, you know, it took, so through friends of mine in the reissue business, there's another great one. I mean, okay, that's yes, there's another example. That one is really, really special to me for a variety of reasons. And one of them is that the original concept for the entire album, okay, you know, that's Murray Head's great album. It's kind of a lost classic. I mean, it was something, you know, Murray's history with that album is amazing. I mean, the most encapsulated version is that Murray had a hit singing one of the songs from Jesus Christ Superstar, had a top 10 hit, had a big movie come out. He was also a terrific actor. And he got signed to Columbia Records by John Hammond, you know, who had, you know, I believe was the guy who found Bob Dylan. Mm-hmm. Hammond brought him in, got it all prepped and ready, and then he had a heart attack or some problem, and he kind of disappeared, and Murray just got kind of cast adrift. And then he made this great record. You know, Murray didn't just make a record; he made a concept record.
It's unbelievable. I think it's also with field recording. Sometimes it sounds like unbelievable.
Absolutely, and none of that is library. So Murray worked with it. And it's funny because so Phil Brown, the recording engineer, who's just a dear person to me, and he's the one who connected me to Murray. He was the engineer in Ferguson Park, and a friend of mine, John Atkinson, who used to be the editor of Stereophile, when I brought him some needle drops to play of Ferguson Park, and he said, Phil Brown wrote a great book, you should read it. The recording engineer. So I read it, and it is one of my favorite books about music and about record. I read all kinds of those books. You know, I read the one by Glenn Johns. I read the one by Jeff Emmerich. And Phil's is just fantastic. And Phil's had 2 whole chapters devoted to 2 albums that, in his, you know, I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, but they not only changed his career, but they changed the way he approached his work and his music. The first one was Nigel Lived, that he worked on with Murray. The other ones were the 2 albums he did with Talk Talk, which are just unbelievable as well. But the album that he did with Murray is just so amazingly inventive. I mean, first of all, you know, Murray's whole thing and what you're holding up there, the concept of the album is that it's a found diary of a guy named Nigel who came from a small town, came to the big city, made it big, became, it kind of got to him. He became drug addicted and kind of hits rock bottom and, you know, and whatever. And so the album cover is supposed to be the found diary. And the recording of it is just amazing. First of all, I mean, Phil's an amazing recording engineer. But to answer your question, yes, like they went into pubs with Phil wearing a big jacket with a tape recorder on his back and microphones in his sleeve. And wow. The way So I read these chapters. I knew the Talk Talk albums. I did not know, all I knew about Murray, and I hate to say this because everybody says it, was the One Night in Bangkok, which he doesn't even sing as Murray Head. He sings as a character who's from New York. So he's like rapping in New York, and his voice is beautiful. It's almost like a Steve Winwood type of, wonderful, amazing sings. And I got, because this is how I am. I want a copy of it. So I get an original UK, I ordered from Discogs and have it shipped from the UK. I listened to it, and by that time I had started talking to Phil a little bit. I found him through Facebook, right? Like, hey Phil, like I run this label and I did one of your records, and he turned out to just be one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I listened to Nigel Live start to finish, and I just was mesmerized, loved it. And I literally said, okay, this might be going to my head because I know Phil. And I played it again. Like, it's one of the only records I think that I've ever played start to finish, like twice in a row, like the first time I played it. And the short of it is that I just loved the record. And Phil connected me directly with Murray. Murray owns it. And I ended up doing the reissue and partnering with Murray on it. Murray absolutely loved the way we rebuilt.
He was involved in the production mastering process.
Well, let's put it this way. So the tapes that we used were Phil's own personal tapes. So Phil sent the tapes overseas. And then, with Murray, it was more like to get the deal done. Okay, this is what we're doing. We're not only using Phil's tapes, we're doing it double 45s, because I'm like, I want absolutely. So two things. That album, they did a great job cutting the original because it was so long that they were really, when a record runs really long, you got to run it way into the inner groove, and you got to play games with the levels and sometimes filter the deepest bass to get it to fit. And so one of the things I told Murray is, I'm going to rebuild all that artwork on the jacket, which he absolutely loved because, he and I can't remember who he put that together with, but they put a lot of time and effort into that original album art. Of course, the record label thought they were just nuts, right? Like, concept album and then trying to do an expensive cover, and it's really his debut album and everything else. So he loved that we were going to do that. And the second thing I said was, we're going to do double 45s. This is going to be cut wide open, all the dynamics, all the bass. Everybody's really going to finally hear what you and Phil really put on the tapes. And so he was involved in that. And the other understanding was that, Phil would be sent the test pressings and all of that. And Phil loves that. In fact, my God, if you saw Phil's, I got to meet Phil and Murray, and I got to go to Phil's house. Phil's got this amazing library of tapes that is just crazy. And then the other thing that's really cool is he's got some of the original art from albums that he worked on, like the original drawings that were used for the covers and stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, that was, I love that project because of, working with Phil and Murray. And Murray was so excited that people would finally hear this album because it was a spectacular, it was a scarring failure. The record company didn't. So he was kind of, when John Hammond out of the picture, Murray was just kind of orphaned in terms of promoting the record. And they really wanted to just write it off as a loss. Murray did a later album that was very famous, and he remains very popular, and he's been touring in France for years. And this reissue finally let him reconnect with those songs, and he started performing those songs live for the very first time. He had never, ever performed them live because I think because of the trauma and what he went through and kind of what it represented emotionally. But, I'm very proud of having put record out, letting people,
I can imagine.
No one who's ever bought that record had heard it or heard of it before we reissued it. And the feedback I get about people saying I'd never heard of this and I love this album are honestly some of the most gratifying comments that I've ever gotten about my label. That album especially, it's just great.
I'm just looking, when did it come out, Shane? Which year was it?
The original?
Your 2017. Okay. 2017.
Yeah, my version came out in 17. I believe the original was 71 or 72.
72, yes.
Yeah.
I think what's very fascinating in just, listening to your recital of the whole back end of the story, you would never get that from a major label, right? You'll never get that from any of the major, let's call it the large reissue labels, Friday Music or some of the other ones that are out there. It's amazing when you get into the weeds of it. The fact that you're a one-man show, right? So that I guess that makes things inherently easier because you're the guy that does everything.
I have
But
one person to convince.
Right. But hearing these stories from you, it's almost like, for me anyway, personally, it makes me want to, obviously, whatever records you come out with, I'm going to get all of them, right? Because it's just the connection that exists between the record, the artist, the music, the sound quality, and the ownership experience is just a whole different level from what you can get on a store shelf, right?
Yeah, and so I believe in transparent sourcing. It's one of the things I'm very upfront and proud of, because part of this is I make the mastering session myself. And for me, it's been pretty easy. There's only, 2 places for me to fly down to. Kevin Gray's in the LA area. It's a very short, easy flight, but I attend every mastering session myself. I bring the best 1 or 2 vinyl versions of any of the records that I'm doing with me, and we play that. And, I always say the first jumping off point in developing the ethos of a reissue label is this: are you going to make what I call a wax museum replica and try to remake the sound of the original vinyl or some other pressing? Or are you going to say, or are you going to take the approach that I do, which is I want to get what's on the tape. I want to honor you never really know all the decisions that go into any given pressing, even an original. You don't really know that the master tape was really the source. It probably was, but do you know it wasn't a cutting copy or something else? You don't. You don't know if the band and their engineers and people signed off and then somebody took the record to QC and the bass made the needle jump and they ordered a recut with less bass without telling anybody. You don't know any of that. Mm-hmm. But when you go after what's on the tape, say, this is what we're going to give people, that to me is the purest expression of the, what I'll call the performance that is put on tape, the master tape. So that's the approach that I take. Listening to the best version is just kind of because I want to know that we're really, I'll be honest, I want to know that we're trouncing it. I want to know we're really murdering the best version that's out there. And so then there's that interplay, between Kevin and myself and who I've got an incredible rapport with, and Ryan as well. And then you do that's when you start what's called a rundown, right? So you go through every track, and that's when you make your EQ and level choices and everything else. And Kevin takes notes, and the board's set up so at any given time you could punch 2 EQs in and out. Rock records are very difficult doing this rundown. It can be much more time consuming because they could be recorded over such long periods of time in different places, different takes, punch-ins. So from song to song, there's a ton of variation. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you hear the first song, you nail an EQ. You got to listen to every song and redo it. Yeah. Then you got to do dry runs on the cutting and everything else. Kevin's got an all analog chain. It never sees a digital preview or anything like that. And so that, that to me is another significant thing is I could never stand to be on the phone asking Kevin or Ryan what it sounds like. Right. And going, well, give me this or that. I have to be there. A big part of it's me being a control freak, but I have to be there. Right. So, okay. So that happens, we cut it, we do our thing. The lacquers go, they get plated, processed and everything else. Then comes, the artwork and the way that works. My artist never gets enough credit. He's a great guy, and he's a great graphic artist. His name's Tom Vatican. He is the one who did all the Music Matters jazz Blue Note reissues. He reconstructed those. One of the things that very few people know or realize is that I almost never, even for the stuff that I've done in the mid to late 90s, the record companies almost never have any original art elements. So we're almost always starting from high-res scans.
Okay.
And there's a whole process of getting that done and done well to not get moire patterns and everything else. And it literally starts with steps that you take during scanning. And it goes all the way through, the whole process. But
that's
what
not
happens?
That's something I know of too, but that's not an easy process to get their good quality out of those kind of original materials. Oh.
Yes, because at the end of the day, the original was made with ink going through screens, and there's a pattern to that. And no matter how advanced the digital front ends are in today's printing presses, at the end, it's still going through screens. And you can get a screen door effect if the screens don't line up, if they're just misregistered. And it's and the painful thing is, you don't know until you make plates and print some. Anyway, I had that problem early on. We solved it completely, but it took some work. Anyway, he's a great graphic artist. He gets the original album, and he gets the original, so the jackets and the labels, and he does scans of both. And we start rebuilding that stuff out. That's another thing. A lot of labels will do their own center labels that are branded to the reissue label. I rebuild it to make it look as much like the original with my logo on it. And that's another thing that is just, it takes a lot of time. So Tom does his thing. He gets the materials. The two vendors that I work with, Stoughton makes my jackets, and an outfit called Dorado does the labels. And the way that Dorado does the labels, after Tom is done doing his thing with the artwork and we get approvals and all that, the albums go to Dorado. Dorado gets it electronically as close as they can, color-wise and everything else. And then they hold that original up and they match it on press. So we get as close as possible to how the original looks. And then Stoughton does the exact same thing. They've got the original jacket. Now there's some educated guesswork in there because all these original jackets and labels have yellowed somewhat over time. So,
you said right, educated guess. You probably go very
into the and the guys at Stoughton are the best. When they did Joe Jackson on The Man for me, that's a trippy cover because it's almost black and white. It's a little sepia tone. And then they've got that bright fluorescent orange. And exactly, look at that. It literally is almost a black and white cover with orange. The cover actually that was one of the ones, if you look at the original, that was one, there was some original art. It looked black and white, but when you looked at an original, there was a tint on it. And so the question was, okay, did that yellow over time, or is that a tint that they did? My guy at Stoughton took a jeweler's loupe and looked down where you could see the dots. And when you looked at the dots, you could see that there was yellow in it. We're like, okay, it does have a tint.
You're kidding.
The guys, no,
I can see that here better probably than through my camera. And you kept those tint.
That's amazing.
Those guys at Stout. So the way that an old style jacket is made, there's two major ways to make a jacket. The way we do it, the so-called old style or tip-on, it gets printed onto super high resolution paper. That paper gets wrapped around and adhered to cardboard blanks. That's an old style or a tip-on. That's the only thing that I do. The other way is direct to board, where you've got a white jacket and they print it directly onto the jacket. That can produce good results too, but the tip-ons are thicker, they're more substantial. I film laminate the front and the back, so they're more resistant to fingerprints, yellowing. They not only look more beautiful today, they're gonna look better over time. So the first thing that comes out there are these big sheets that are the front and the back cover. And those guys at Stoughton sat there with that original cover, and they probably spent 40 minutes while I was there, adjusting and rerunning, and printing out these big sheets so they could get that yellow tint right, nail that fluorescent orange without turning the rest of the jacket kind of reddish from the orange.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what's fascinating?
Those are details.
You're still, there's two things that pop up. You're still only charging $35 for that record. I mean, that's the crazy part.
Yeah,
Seriously.
yeah.
I mean, you think about what you just said, going back, jeweler loop, readjusting the press. I mean, all those things cost money, right? I mean, it's not like you're the only customer that Stoughton has. And so while they're adjusting the presses, all the rest of the stuff has to wait, right? So, yes. I mean, if I'm, Joe consumer, I'm like, gosh, these records, I mean, not knowing, I'd be like, what do you charge for these? $100, $150?
And,
I mean, it's amazing.
And realistically, if they did have a traditional 5 to 7 multiplier to cost of goods, and not just mine, okay, like, Analog Productions, Mobile Fidelity, there are some other labels going through this, Impex. There are some other labels going to, this thing too, but for all of us, I know they'd say the same thing. If we had traditional multipliers, these things would cost closer to $100. And the thing is like, that's not what the market will bear. And you just kind of have to eat it, right? Hope your volume stays up.
Shane, the funny thing though is that when you have done your job and when you have done your presses, your records, sometimes later, they are $100, $150, $200. That's the funny thing. But then you are out of the food chain.
Right.
Well,
right.
So I always tell people mine are very unlimited editions. People keep buying them. I'll keep making them. I'm not going to do, I don't do the scarcity thing. I respect it. But, sometimes you never know when you're going to have a unicorn. And I want the market to determine that, not, me artificially in order to, make sure I knock out my first. And let me just say this. So with the labels and with the jackets, after they get run, they send me Dorado, and Katie's the lady I deal with there, Katie Hernandez. She's amazing. She sends me back my record with the labels and I get to look, and if it's not nailed, they'll redo it. And the same thing with Stoughton. That is, another step that I do and I pay for is they send me the sheets in a poster and they send me my original back and I get to look and approve after they've run them. And if it needs to be run, you got to pay and replate it and all of that. But, on the other hand, too, we've had a few of them that are just the ones that come to mind. Two of the trickiest ones that we did were Gene Clark White Light and the Joan Armour trading that you held up.
Gene Clark, phenomenal.
Those are, take a look at those. My guy called me and he goes, I'm not going to be able to make this match, but I'm going to be able to make it beautiful and more beautiful. And, some of them, it doesn't make sense. Like they have to be done on press. And that's just my guy there, Rob Maushin, is the guy that is me in place of me. And the funny, to your point, Danny, like, yes, some of these things are extra steps, like the extra proofs and having them sent to me is some extra cost to me, but Stoughton does this and they'll do, they do it because they care. It depends on whether the customer cares.
Well, but I think the fact that they care, I mean, I think we talked about this a couple of years ago when you came up with the Erasure Wonderland, and besides the fact that Erasure brings back so many memories from college days, right? I mean, this club we used to go to, they would play Erasure all the time. Anyway, I think I was texting you from Amoeba back in the good old days when you could go record shopping. And I was like, hey, what's with this Wonderland reissue? It's not yours. I guess someone else came out with it. Well, it turns out that a friend of mine had bought the copy mistakenly thinking it was yours. And we played both. And I tell you, the difference between yours and I don't know who, I forgot who reissued the one that was available at the same time, was night and day. Not to plug Joe Jackson anymore, but just in case, it was literally night and day, and it brings back all the things you talked about with the mastering process. You know, cutting it wide open. You know, very limited compression or no compression, or you know, however Kevin decides to cut it. Right. This reissue,
no compression,
sounded flat, compressed. There was no bass. There were no dynamics, and I was like, dude. This was $28.99 at Amoeba, and yours was $35.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you not spend the extra $7? You know, anyway.
And people don't know. People don't know.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and that one is a really interesting case. I'll be frank. When I caught wind, as I had already gotten through production and had test pressings, that there was going to be an import version from the UK, and I was told it would not be brought over to the States. Well, it was. But there's a perfect example. Did that reissue tell you what the source was?
No.
What the hell did they cut it from? They don't.
No.
And that's one of the reasons that people don't trust a lot of reissues, is because if you're not being upfront about what you did, what the source was, who did the cutting and everything else. Now, Erasure, it's funny you say that, because one of the things oftentimes, the tapes have extensive mastering notes that sometimes go back to the first pressing. Sometimes they go back to other pressings, and it's amazing. So Erasure had highly detailed cutting notes.
And I like your, by the way, you have the best hype stickers in the business. Yeah, your hype stickers are the most informative. Really. No.
That's
that's
what I try to do.
Yeah, everything you need to know, everything you want to know as a collector, as an audiophile, is on this hype sticker. Everything, and that's great.
And another step another step I started to take, Michael. If you look at the back of Joan Armatrading, I started listing the source on the jackets. So even if you lose the hype sticker or the outer bag, the source is on the back of the jackets.
Yeah, you're right. Everything is here.
It's amazing.
I put a funny little symbol that'll say that it looks like a tape, and it'll show you that it was, you know, cut from a, you know, from an analog tape, and that one was a 1/2-inch safety copy. But Erasure in the original notes was very specific that, assumed probably for playback reasons, they dropped the bass. They cut the bass below, I think it was 35 cycles. So that literally was, so that literally was, as far as I know. In fact, what's funny, you know, people have all different kinds of playback systems and have all kinds of different things to say. And I had somebody tell me once that Erasure, that they really didn't think it had enough deep bass. And I said, well, you know, it's funny that you say that, because it literally is the only version of Erasure that has the deep bass, if the people who cut it before actually followed the mastering notes. But yeah, that one, and you know, that one was a spectacular failure in terms of sales, and I think it really hurt that import version came over at the same time that mine came out. You know, so live and learn. But I'm still really proud of that record. I love the way it sounds.
It may have been a commercial miss from your end, obviously, which is a shame. But sonically,
it's great.
It's phenomenal. It's punchy. It's dynamic. It's got shove. I mean, it's like how I remember it sounding in the dance club, right? When they juice the bass up and use compressors to punch it out. Right?
I always was really angry about Erasure, because I was a big Yazoo fan, and that he throw out Alison Moyer for this guy who sounds in a way like small Alison Moyer. That was terrible.
You know, when I tell people the story, that is always exactly what I say, is that he got, you know, Vince Clarke, is that his name?
Yeah, Vince Clarke.
He got rid of Allison and found a guy who sounds remarkably like her. Now, that being
But
said,
not as good as Alison Moyet. Please give Alison Moyet sounds is a much better singer than this guy.
I'm going to be diplomatic.
You know, it's funny
that I love the most.
Okay.
Not to get into the weeds of Erasure, but their new album that came out, I guess, earlier this year. Well, not this year, last year. They kind of remind me a little bit of a Pet Shop Boys, right? You know, it's like they had their heyday in the 80s and 90s, and now they're just kind of, I don't know. Anyway, not to get into the weeds of it, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, Wonderland, I think, is such a great record. And again, to me, it brings back so many memories, which is another thing that I think records are a fundamental connection with, that they're almost like time travel documents, right? You put on a record and you're like, oh man, I totally remember where I was and what I was doing when I heard that song, you know? And for me, forever, when I listen to Erasure, I'm going to think back to college and the Coliseum Dance Club in Daytona Beach, Florida, right? and Tim Lusner, the DJ, right? I mean, it's like it's inextricably connected to it. And as you know, as are with obviously many other records, other memories and stuff. But you know, it's fascinating. It's really
and honestly, it's one of the reasons that my choices are so eccentric. I mean, in a sense, compared to other reissue labels, it's like, you know, I've got connections to all these albums, like explain working with Murray Head. You know, Marshall Crenshaw was probably the one that I worked with the most in terms of direct. You know, we rebuilt the album cover because he didn't like the original album art, and you know, it was great working with him. The album I had the most emotional connect, that had the biggest footprint in my life, is Billy Squier, Don't Say No. I had like 3 years of my life where I listened to nothing but Billy Squier and AC/DC. I was into big guitar rock back in the day, and I listened to that. You know, you were asking me earlier to at some point in this to take an opportunity to plug upcoming titles. One of the titles I got coming out this year is a 2 LP expanded edition of The Church Starfish, 1988. That's the year I graduated from high school. You know, Under the Milky Way, I still think is one of the most beautiful, haunting, like big songs. That song has a huge footprint in my life. I mean, I've been listening to that song since 1988. There's not an alt rock station going anywhere where you don't hear that song in Reptile all the time. You know, this was another labor of love. It's another one where we expanded out. Well, it's a double album, so it's got a beautiful gatefold. But the beautiful thing is we not only got access to their 8 extra tracks, including acoustic versions of, I believe it's Under the Milky Way and I believe Antenna, but we took this whole compilation of extra stuff from separate tapes and put it all onto one tape and kept all of the extras 100% analog. Wow. So it is a 100% analog mastered through and through. Yeah, and you know, the Starfish is an amazing album in the sense that got a guy named, a great session guitar player, guy who played with Stevie Nicks and other people, named Waddy Wachtel, produced that record. They recorded it in LA with real professionals. It's an amazing recording for a rock record. Big, spacious, you know, the whole thing. And then another really fun project that I've got coming out this year is Joe Jackson's Body and Soul is going to finally see vinyl release. And I'm working on that. The album art is done. You know, I'm just kind of looking at tying up some particulars and looking at the delays at the jacket and pressing plants. Everybody got hit with two things happened with the pandemic. Everybody's gotten closed once or maybe twice. And then there was a hole to dig out of. And then the music industry, people are at home and buying and listening to records like nonstop. So like, great for me, great for business, but it's been very difficult for me to gauge, like when I do represses, how many do I get? Represses don't usually fly back off the shelves, but now like I've had 2 or 3 of them this last year where I get 500 records in and they're gone the day that they come in because people have pre-ordered, and my wholesalers are also going crazy. So it's a great but impacted time, but nevertheless, Body and Soul will finally come out on vinyl this year. And I'm getting back to all of the Matthew. I had originally announced 4 Matthew Sweet records, one of which was, his great, I call it the holy trinity of power pop, Girlfriend, Altered Beast, and 100% Fun. But I had also announced and had test pressings of Son of Altered Beast, which is a mostly live album, and then some extra studio tracks, which is terrific. And that's going to see the light of day this year also. So
if I may make one suggestion, Shane, maybe for consideration for 2022, Mike's Murder, Joe Jackson, phenomenal.
I love that.
It comes with a great hype sticker too. Check it out.
Great cover, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
Deborah
think
Winger, great actress.
I think that the whole audiophile market is a fast-growing market. I think the people are getting more and more aware that there are huge differences within vinyl editions, and I think it will get more and more and more in the direction of good pressings, of audiophile pressing. And the word is around. You can see it on my channel there. It gets more and more and more. And I think if you once have heard how good vinyl can be, may it be your intervention records or may it be impacts or analog production, doesn't matter which one. But if you once heard it, you want more, and you want that kind of stuff and not the cheap digital things.
Exactly. And, going back to, the concept of transparent sourcing, the hype stickers, all the information I put on these things that tell us, what these things are. We live in a world that is highly specialized that way. When you go to a restaurant now, I was just at a restaurant on Thursday, and a great restaurant in Tacoma, Primo Grill. I'm going to pimp them because they're just great, and I love them. But it's how common is it for a restaurant to tell you the vendors that they work with, right? We get our seafood from this place. We get our mushrooms from this place. Our beef comes from it. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Makeup, clothes. Like people are totally used to the idea of, authenticity has become an overused word. But what it often means is that people are upfront with you about the people they work with and the artisans that make their artisanal products what they are. Vinyl to me should absolutely be the same way.
Agreed.
And I will say this, I think some of the people that I don't like calling any other people doing reissues competitors, because we're all doing different things, right? Like Analog Productions and I do not do the same kinds of titles. Chad Acoustic Sounds is actually like my best wholesaler. Like I've known Chad forever. I love those guys. I buy a lot of his records. And I know his guys Chad only listens to blues. There's only 2 kinds of music in the world: blues and the stuff he doesn't listen to.
Very true.
But his guys who work for him are great guys. I got great relationships over there, and they like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. But Chad is one who does a great job of telling you where his stuff comes from and what the source is and the mastering people. But not everybody does. And I understand the point of view that, okay, maybe the brand's the most important. If it's premium, and you get that. I just don't adhere to it. It is, like I said, you get the information on the hype sticker, on the back of the jackets, it says what the source is. And then if you go to my website, every detail is on there. I write, and I write all that content myself. I write up mastering notes. I tell you my impression, because, hey, let's face this too. I've been in there and heard the tapes. I can't bring you guys with me, but I can tell you a little bit about what the tape sounded like, and I know what the original sounded like. And I'm like, here's what it's going to sound like when you put the intervention version on your turntable. It's going to be explosive.
It reminds me, Shane, if you remember, this was a couple of years ago at I think it was the Newport show, and we did a Joe Jackson event with the folks at Einstein. And I remember there was this guy in the crowd, and he kept running into me in the hallways. It was like, "Hey, when's Shane coming? When's Shane coming? I'm a big Joe Jackson fan." And I guess he had every single original UK pressing and all that, and intimately familiar. He kept, "Hey, do they really sound that much better? I can't imagine they sound that much better." And then, you came on and you played the originals and your reissue, and it was wow. And even this guy was like, "Holy cow!" I think he placed an order for all 3 records on the spot, if I remember.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, he did. He did. I think there's a video of it somewhere on YouTube. Again, it's that authenticity and the quality that you bring to the table that is just, it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. So anyway.
Well, and that's the part I miss about shows. It was not a moneymaker for me to show up at an audio show with a booth. It was terrible, but I loved 2 things. I loved connecting with people and the direct feedback of talking directly to my customers. And I used to bring a little setup, because one of the things that I do is so whenever I get test pressings and something's going to come out, I send the records over to Rob Robinson at Channel D. He's a guy who does pure vinyl, and he does pure, God, I'm forgetting the name, but he does computer audio setup playback, and he's got software that is for doing high res needle drops, ripping drops, needle drops of stuff and making them sound great. And I send those out to him. So what I could do for people, what I did is I brought a MacBook to these shows and a pair of really great headphones, and I let people actually listen to needle drops. Mm-hmm. That is the one thing that's missing in a sense. It's like, I don't know, I'm just going to spitball a little bit here, but 3 enterprising people like ourselves at some point, we should figure out a way to get our fans together and actually play some stuff together. It's like, do some kind of, when we get to a point where people are allowed to gather again,
let's hope.
People
let's
should,
hope.
yeah. We're
gonna
get back to it again.
I have a suggestion. I think my viewers will be very pleased if you agree to that. When we put out this video, usually in the first couple of hours, there are a huge amount of comments, and maybe they can ask you things, and you be so kind and give them an answer in the comment section of our video.
I absolutely will do that. Is
That's
that going to be today?
No, we are putting it out. Yeah, when you see it, it's out. I will put it out next Friday, because Friday is a very good evening because this is a little longer video than usual, so the people have time and ask the question in the comments, and so they will be answered, as you have heard right now.
I would absolutely look forward to that. And I will say, one of the most pleasant surprises and experiences, I could say in my past life, that experiences on online internet forums have not been the most enjoyable. But I have to give a shout out. Some of my biggest supporters from the get-go, there was a group of guys on the Steve Hoffman audio boards who started a thread dedicated to my label. And I was nervous about participating in that because of past experiences being less than optimal. But these guys cultivated, they're the ones who did it. They're just the most wonderful group of people. They keep it civil. Most of the time when somebody acts up, it gets policed by the guys in there before I ever even see it. And just a great group. I literally, my label at this point would not be here without the support of those
awesome.
Guys.
Really great.
And it's a cool place where people are civil, fun to talk to, interesting. Sometimes they know more about the records that I'm doing than I do. Incredibly knowledgeable.
Yeah, sometimes it's
awesome.
unbelievable.
People. So it's like, so I get to crowdsource knowledge from those guys too.
So over an hour, Shane, thank you so much that you gave us your precious time and so many gorgeous informations about your beautiful label. I really hope that wasn't the last time we have seen us here on my channel. You're always welcome. And it really was a pleasure, and I'm very proud that you have been on my channel. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks to your audience, and thank Danny too for connecting us.
Yeah, that's great.
This has been a lot of fun.
Right.
I really enjoy this, and I'll come on anytime you ask.
Oh, that's great. We'll see you. Shane, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Be well.